Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. What exactly did Tom Riddle do to scare the orphanage children in the cave of his future Horcrux? First, let's briefly recall what was happening with Tom at the orphanage at the time of these events. Even back then, it was clear that Tom was starting to display his magical abilities, skillfully controlling and managing his potential. Although he was exclusively using wandless magic, it allowed him to move objects, control the minds and wills of animals, and also harm those whom he considered a threat. All these strange occurrences inevitably affected how the other children felt about him. They were, without a doubt, afraid of and avoided him. They sensed that something odd was happening with Tom, something different from them, which of course pleased the future Lord Voldemort, as the feeling of power and the desire to stand out among others were always characteristic traits of his. Now, shortly before Dumbledore's arrival, an incident occurred that became significant not only in the life of young Tom Riddle, but also for the other children who were caught up in the events. One day, all the residents of the London orphanage where Tom lived went on a nature trip to walk along the coast and among the seaside cliffs. After some time, Tom noticed something in the distance that strongly resembled a cave. Perhaps its shape immediately caught his attention, or maybe something inside him called him there, his magical abilities or the echoes of dark magic. Overall, it's unclear what exactly drew Tom to this cave, but the fact remains, Tom decided to go inside. It is known that there were no accessible paths to the cave, and evidently the only way to achieve his goal was through magic. However, as we recall, he did not go there alone. Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop, fellow orphanage children, accompanied him. It's unknown what kind of relationship Tom had with these two and what motives Amy and Dennis had. Maybe they followed him because his ability to do unusual things seemed very intriguing to them. And we remember how Tom liked being surrounded by a retinue and followers. Or perhaps the children went out of mere curiosity. We also know that after this incident, both Amy and Dennis became rather withdrawn, which clearly suggests that they encountered something terrifying and horrifying in the cave. Afterward, they could not really explain what exactly had happened, saying only that they were simply exploring the surroundings with Tom. It is interesting that Tom himself was also not accidentally drawn to the cave, and here we can reasonably speculate that the cave was also full of dark magic. This is supported by the fact that the inferi inhabiting it were there long before young Tom first entered it. Yes, there is a point of view that suggests the inferi were created by Voldemort through dark magic, and are victims of his terror during the First Wizarding War. But what if these inferi were the result of events that occurred long before Voldemort? This could explain what frightened Amy and Dennis during that ill-fated visit to the cave. Now let's consider where such a large number of bodies, which later became inferi, might have come from in the cave. This can be understood by considering that Tom Riddle's childhood coincided with the aftermath of World War I, and such a large number of dead bodies could be a consequence of the tragic events of 1914 to 1918. Another theory we can propose is that Tom himself, upon first entering the cave, had no idea what he might encounter. It is entirely possible that he simply disturbed the inferi by touching the water's surface. And perhaps the inferi moved toward the children, sensing Tom's magical essence and the echoes of dark magic within him. Without a doubt, Tom had a significant advantage over the two other children because, firstly, he was in a way mentally prepared to encounter something unusual in the cave. And secondly, Tom's nature was inherently different from Amy and Dennis's. In any case, J.K. Rowling leaves this question open, allowing us to make our own assumptions about what exactly happened in the cave when the three children ventured inside. What happened in the cave was just the beginning. Tom Riddle first realized how easy it was to control and intimidate others with his power. This episode showed that dark traits were already beginning to emerge within him. Cruelty, thirst for power, and lack of empathy. These only grew stronger over the years. However, the question remains, how did the boy who used his magic to frighten others grow into the true monster that became Lord Voldemort? What led the orphan Tom Riddle to completely lose his humanity? To understand this, we need to delve deeper into his life and figure out what events shaped his path to darkness. Tom Riddle was born on December 31st, 1926, in London. His mother, Merope Gaunt, died shortly after giving birth. His father abandoned him without even knowing he had a son. Tom ended up at Mrs. Cole's orphanage, a cold, poor place where no one truly cared for him. The world showed its cruelty right from the start. From the very beginning, the boy was alone. There was no warmth in the orphanage, neither literally nor figuratively. Mrs. Cole remembered him as a strange child. He never cried. Little Tom was different from the others. He lived in the shadows, watching everything happening around him. But no one suspected that something powerful and dark was growing inside him. Tom was not just an ordinary orphan. He was a wizard, though he didn't know it yet. His childhood coincided with the Great Depression. In 1929, the global crisis hit. Mrs. Cole's orphanage barely made ends meet. Hunger, cold, and constant deprivation were the norm. In these conditions, Tom learned how to survive. No one helped him. From a young age, he understood that you have to fight for your place in the world. The weak do not survive. The other children didn't like him. Tom was different. He was quiet and frightening. That didn't attract friends. On the contrary, they avoided him. But when the children sensed they had power over him, they bullied Tom. He had to endure. But unlike other victims, Tom never forgave. When someone hurt him, he found a way to get revenge. It was subtle, but cruel. Sometimes a belonging would disappear, or an animal would get hurt. He was a creepy child, Mrs. Cole later recalled. With each passing year, Tom became more withdrawn. His strange behavior frightened the others. Childhood is a harsh world, especially for those who stand out. Tom learned to use that fear. One day, he lured 2 children from the orphanage into a seaside cave. No one knows what he did there, but the children came out changed, terrified. Dumbledore recalled, "They never said, but their faces told the story." This was his first demonstration of power. Tom realized he could control others. He enjoyed it. Fear became his weapon. He understood that he could not only defend himself, but also attack. He liked being in control of the situation. This sense of power grew with him. Tom Riddle arrived at Hogwarts in 1938. He was 11, but he already understood the world's cruelty. He was sorted into Slytherin, his first triumph. The Slytherin house was known for its pure blood pride and ambition. For an orphan boy, this was an important step. However, school life wasn't easy. Tom had neither money nor support. Others came with full trunks, while Tom remained poor and alone. This angered him. He hated his weakness and decided to hide it. Tom told himself, "I must become great." Hogwarts was a place where power ruled. Tom quickly realized that, just like at the orphanage, power was everything here. He stood out among the students. With his knowledge and magical abilities, he soon became a favorite of Professor Slughorn. Tom was brilliant and very ambitious, Slughorn recalled. This was his path to leadership. But Riddle didn't just study, he searched for his heritage. He learned that his mother, Merope Gaunt, was a descendant of Salazar Slytherin. This discovery gave him confidence. Now he knew he wasn't just a wizard, he was the heir of one of the greatest wizards. This sense of superiority grew in him every day. In 1939, World War II began. Tom, returning to the orphanage, saw chaos, destruction, and death. But he felt no fear or pity. On the contrary, it strengthened his disdain for the Muggle world. He believed that power was the only way to rule. The war only confirmed his beliefs. Every summer he returned to the orphanage, and each time his hatred grew. In the fall, back at Hogwarts, he became stronger and gathered his first followers. People like Avery and Lestrange admired his strength. They saw a leader in Tom. This was his first army. Tom was fascinated by dark magic. He kept his interests hidden from the teachers, but secretly studied ways to achieve immortality. Upon learning about Horcruxes, he became obsessed with the idea. Tom no longer wanted just power. He wanted to conquer death. This became his main goal. At Hogwarts, Tom opened the Chamber of Secrets. This was a legend connected to his ancestor, Salazar Slytherin. No one else could do it, but Tom, as the true heir, managed it. He controlled the basilisk, an ancient creature capable of killing with a glance. This gave him a true sense of power. In 1943, the basilisk killed Myrtle Warren. This became Tom's first murder. He felt no remorse. On the contrary, he turned this moment into an act of magic. He created his first Horcrux, a diary. This was his first step on the path to immortality. Tom Riddle always held a grudge against his mother. Merope Gaunt, though a witch, died shortly after his birth, leaving him alone in a world full of cruelty. For Tom, this was a betrayal. He couldn't understand how a witch could allow herself to die. His mother's death became a symbol of weakness for him, and he vowed never to be like that. This grudge fueled his fear of death, which over time became an obsession. Death terrified him more than anything. It was something inevitable, something even great wizards like his mother couldn't avoid. But Tom was different. He believed he would find a way to cheat death. This fear drove him to seek answers in the dark arts. He wanted not just power, but immortality. The magical world offered many sources of knowledge, but Tom sought what was forbidden and dangerous. Tom delved deeper into the dark arts, dreaming of immortality. He found mentions of Horcruxes, an ancient and forbidden magic that allowed one to split the soul and hide its pieces in various objects. This process was incredibly dangerous, but Tom was willing to risk everything. No wizard has committed as many murders for the sake of creating Horcruxes, Slughorn later recalled when he realized what Tom had been planning. The first step on this path was the murder of Myrtle Warren in 1943. Tom did not hesitate. He used the basilisk, which he had released from the Chamber of Secrets, to kill her. It was a cold-blooded murder, but for Tom it had special significance. He created his first Horcrux, the diary. This object became the first symbol of his quest for immortality. Opening the Chamber of Secrets was a significant milestone in his life. He proved to himself that he was the true heir of Salazar Slytherin. His control over the basilisk only strengthened his belief in his own superiority. "I am the heir of Slytherin," Tom thought, realizing he was capable of much more than any other wizard. He was no longer just a student. He was chosen. The power over the basilisk gave him a sense of invincibility. Tom began to believe that only he was worthy of ruling the wizarding world. The Chamber of Secrets became a symbol of hidden power, inaccessible to others. Each step on the path to its opening confirmed his belief in his uniqueness. He no longer merely craved power, he felt it was his rightful inheritance. With each Horcrux, Tom tore apart his soul, becoming less and less human. But he didn't care. To him, this was the path to immortality. The soul, just a tool to achieve his goal. He wasn't afraid of the consequences. Tom was convinced he could control even this. After all, he now knew that death would not have power over him. The more he studied the dark arts, the more consumed he became by the idea of absolute power. Tom didn't just want to rule the wizarding world. He wanted to transcend existence itself. Each murder brought him closer to that goal. His ability to manipulate and kill became his new reality. After graduating from Hogwarts, Tom Riddle didn't rush to build a career. He declined job offers from the Ministry of Magic. There was only one thing that interested him: power. Tom took a job at Borgin and Burke's, a shop known for dealing in dark artifacts. Here, he gained access to the rarest and most dangerous magical items. He studied ancient magic, delving deeper and deeper into the dark arts. But his main goal remained the creation of Horcruxes. Tom continued to tear apart his soul. Each murder took away a piece of his humanity. He created new Horcruxes, hiding parts of his soul in various objects. The gaunt ring, Slytherin's locket, Helga Hufflepuff's cup, all became part of his immortality. Tom understood that with each Horcrux, his soul became more disfigured, but he didn't stop. He didn't care about his soul. The only thing that mattered was never dying. But changes were inevitable. With each new Horcrux, Tom lost more of his appearance. His face became cold and emotionless. His eyes grew dull, and his skin paled. But the changes were not only external. Inside he was changing too. His thirst for power became increasingly destructive. He lost the ability to feel normal human emotions. Fear, compassion, joy, all became foreign to him. His mental health also suffered. Constantly tearing his soul apart made him increasingly unstable. He felt an emptiness inside, and nothing could fill it. Tom became obsessed with artifacts, power, and control over others. This obsession consumed him from within, but he couldn't stop. Immortality had become his curse. Eventually, Tom could no longer hide his changes. Those who worked with him at Borgin and Burke's began to notice his oddities. His gaze became increasingly cruel, and his behavior unpredictable. But Tom didn't care about that. He was only interested in power, and he was willing to do anything to become the greatest wizard of all time. At this point, Tom Riddle ceased to be himself. Now, he was Lord Voldemort. This name was his new beginning. He chose it to completely reject his human nature and ties to the Muggle world. "I will change this world," he thought, gathering an army of followers who called themselves Death Eaters. His full immersion in the dark arts made him dangerous and ruthless. He created plans to seize power, attracting the most powerful dark wizards to his side. Each of them saw in Voldemort someone who could change the world. He promised them power and strength, and in return, he demanded loyalty. Thus began his war for domination. Voldemort was no longer just Tom Riddle. He had become a symbol of fear. His name instilled terror. People were afraid to even speak it aloud. He who must not be named. That's how he was now known. But for Voldemort, this was only the beginning. He craved more. He wasn't satisfied with just power. He wanted complete control over life and death. Each step on the path to power became increasingly brutal. He no longer cared about the cost. Killings, destruction, the subjugation of the magical world, these were just means to an end. Voldemort became more and more ruthless, and nothing could stop him. In 1994, Voldemort returned. His resurrection was a terrible ritual carried out with the help of Peter Pettigrew. Voldemort's weak body, which had hidden in Albania after his defeat, was given new life. He used his father's bones, Pettigrew's flesh, and Harry Potter's blood. This moment was a turning point for Voldemort. He regained physical form, but it was entirely different. The body he received was unnatural. His skin became marble white, his eyes snake-like, and his facial features lost all traces of humanity. But the most significant change happened inside. The fear of death that had once driven him to create Horcruxes had now intensified to its limit. Now he knew that death could be defeated, but it still haunted him, and that fear became his driving force. Voldemort understood that he could be destroyed, and this knowledge made him even more obsessed. He returned stronger, but also weaker. In every step he took, there was a desperate attempt to avoid death at all costs. His soul was too mutilated to experience normal human emotions, but the fear remained. He feared not just death, but that his work and his immortality could be destroyed. Voldemort's arrogance after his return reached new heights. He felt invincible. Even Harry Potter, who had survived their first encounter, no longer seemed a threat to him. During the duel at the cemetery, he displayed utter contempt for his enemy, playing with him like a toy. But behind this display of confidence was deep anxiety. Voldemort knew that if something went wrong, everything could fall apart. Outwardly, Voldemort seemed unshakable. He gathered the Death Eaters, regaining his supporters. He once again began to build plans for seizing power, but now with a desperate resolve. His belief in his own immortality became an obsession. He was ready for any cruelty to maintain control over his life. But with each step, that fear ate away at him from within. Psychologically, Voldemort was no longer who he used to be. His humanity had almost completely disappeared. What had once made him Tom Riddle no longer existed. He knew no love, no pity, no friendship. All that was left was a cold, calculating thirst for power and immortality. His soul was so distorted that even his followers began to fear his madness. The fear of death and the desire for control over life became the main driving forces behind his behavior. Now he acted more cruelly and unpredictably. Every step toward immortality made him more ruthless. He tried to eliminate any threats that could challenge his power or immortality. In his eyes, death was the ultimate enemy, and he was ready to destroy everything in his path to avoid it. But his fear also made him weak. The more he sought immortality, the more dependent he became on his Horcruxes. His paranoia grew, along with his distrust of even the most loyal Death Eaters. He searched for traitors everywhere, believing that any one of them could be the cause of his downfall. This made him even more ruthless and inhuman. The resurrected Voldemort had lost all that tied him to human nature. He became a living embodiment of fear and hatred. His desire for immortality had led him to a point where he couldn't stop. Even if he had achieved complete domination over the magical world, it wouldn't have been enough. His war with the world continued, but ultimately it was a war with himself. Voldemort could no longer enjoy his victories, because behind each one lurked the fear of defeat. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope this means you found it interesting, and if so, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.